Shalom. Welcome to the Charlotte Jewish Community's annual Yom HaShoah commemoration. I'm Rabbi Michael Wolk, Senior Rabbi of Temple Israel. In 1951, the Israeli Knesset established the 27th day of the month of Nisan as Yom HaShoah, or the day chosen on the Jewish calendar to memorialize the deaths of 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis and their allies. The Knesset chose this day because of its proximity to the timing of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943, and because this time of year, the days of Sfirat HaOmer, between Passover and Shavuot, are already a time of semi-mourning on the Jewish calendar. Each year, we come together as a community to mark Yom HaShoah, because teaching the history of the Holocaust is a communal obligation that we honor as a way of making sure that it can never happen again. Even though we can't be together in person this year like we would like, we continue this ritual in the best way we can. We come together today for three purposes. First, we memorialize the 6 million Jews and millions of others who lost their lives to Hitler and the Nazis. Then we honor survivors, the men and women among us who experienced the horrors of Hitler's rise to power and the atrocities of the Holocaust before rebuilding their lives anew. Those who are with us today, as well as those who have already passed from this world, serve as inspirations and teachers to us as a community and as individuals. Finally, we are here to learn. The Holocaust was the culmination of centuries of anti-Jewish hatred and violence. Jewish people know how hatred expressed in words leads to hatred expressed through actions, becoming more and more barbaric. The Jewish people know how good people can remain on the side as bystanders. We know that we must constantly be on the lookout for the world's oldest hatred, rearing its head in new forms. But we also learn how we should use our experience to look outward and to recognize that hatred is dangerous to many different peoples. The term that we're too familiar with, genocide, was first coined by a Jewish lawyer from Poland named Raphael Lemkin. As a youth, he studied the attempted destruction of Armenian Christians by the Ottomans, even though there was no word at the time to describe an attempt to completely destroy a minority group. While Lemkin escaped to Sweden and then the United States, his family was wiped out by the Nazis. Because of his work, genocide was recognized as a crime by the United Nations. Although Lemkin's life was shaped by the Holocaust, he took a universal approach and fought for all victims of genocide. He wrote in a Hebrew poem in 1957, "They came to kill you, and not out of mere bloodlust. God commanded them to rule over all other nations. Your only sin, your very name. They will blot out your seed on account of race and religion." Most importantly, perhaps, Lemkin believed that the responsibility for punishing atrocities was not on victims, but rather on courts. Today, we have the incredible opportunity to learn from an attorney who has championed this work. The daughter of a Holocaust survivor, Maxine Marcus, has dedicated her career to defending the victims of war crimes and atrocities across the world. We open our service today with memorial. Students at our Hebrew high school will light memorial candles for the 6 million Jews and 5 million other victims of the Holocaust, people who have no yahrzeit dates of their own to commemorate. They will be introduced by Hebrew High Director Megan Harkavy.
There we go. Under Nazi rule, even children were victims. Over 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered during the Holocaust, and even those who survived suffered great hardships. Many children experienced starvation and disease, saw their parents killed and their homes destroyed. Some ran away or hid, suddenly forced to fend for themselves. Others were left with strangers. These children bore physical, emotional, and spiritual scars and were robbed of their childhoods. In honor of the children who suffered and in honor of all the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust, we light 6 candles.
Annette Sir was born in Paris, France in 1929. She recounts what the outbreak of the war meant initially for me as a 10-year-old was the end of a predictable, secure, and safe life. When the Nazis occupied northern France, Annette and her family fled south, traveling by night and hiding by day. She remembers, I clutched my mother's hand. I knew I'd never see my home again. In 1942, the family left France and fled to Spain. After being abandoned by their guides, continued on a dangerous trek to safety in Portugal. For Annette Sir, a candle is lit.
Ludwig Biermann was born in Berlin in 1931.
Erika Berger was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1937. She last saw her father when she was 5 before he was taken into an Hungarian forced labor division. Erika's mother changed her name and lived as a housekeeper in a Christian home while Erika was sent to a Protestant orphanage. For Erika Berger, a candle is lit.
Jan Brown was born in Slovakia in 1934. Jan's teacher and her husband provided protection for the Browns when Germany occupied Slovakia in 1944. Jan was forced to hide in a suitcase on top of a closet in complete silence when there was fear of a Nazi search. For Jan Brown, a candle is lit.
Dorian Grunbaum was born in Rotterdam in 1942 and was only 13 months old when the Nazis came to arrest her parents. Her parents had arranged to leave Dorian with Christian neighbors when they were deported, but when they saw her crying bitterly, her parents brought her with them. They were deported to the Westerbork transit camp and later to the concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. For Dorian Grunbaum, a candle is lit.
Jochebed Farber was born in Poland in 1938 and entered the Vilna ghetto when she was barely 2 years old. Jochebed lived in the ghetto with her mother and father until she was seized during a children's action roundup. Her father wrote in his diary on March 27, 1944, "These are holy things we simply do not understand until a time in the future when God, blessed be He, might explain them to us." For Jochebed Farber, a candle is lit.
In addition to Jewish victims, the Nazis targeted others who did not fit the vision of a master race of Aryans. Among them were Roma and Sinti, individuals with mental and physical disabilities, real and suspected political opponents, Jehovah's Witnesses, men accused of engaging in homosexual acts, and persons considered to be asocial. Osi Skoska was born in Austria in 1936, the youngest of 6 children born to Roman Catholic Roma. He was sent to the Birkenau gypsy camp with his family and died of typhus at the age of 7. For Osi, a candle is lit.
With all of these beautiful candles lit, we take time to remember those survivors from our community who died in this past year. We hold them in our hearts and in our minds, honoring their lives' stories and cherishing the time that we shared. With gratitude, we remember Esia Acker, originally from Vilna, Lithuania. She survived the war in the Vilna ghetto, Riga, Latvia, and Stutthof concentration camp. She lost members of her family and spent 3 years in a DP camp in Germany. Ruth Ben Joseph. Originally from Antwerp, Belgium, Ruth survived the war in hiding in a farmhouse outside of Nice. As a young teen, she participated in the French underground resistance. She left Europe to go to Palestine, where she fought in the army during Israel's war for independence. Felix Pearson. After being interred in the Lodz ghetto, Felix and his father were sent to Birkenau and then Dachau. His mother and brother were killed earlier in the war, and his father died only 3 days after they were liberated. Robert Stark. Originally from Budapest, he and his brother were in an orphanage after his parents were taken to camps. He survived the mass shooting of students and teachers at the orphanage. He left Hungary for Palestine and ultimately ended up in Chile. Finally, we remember Lola Woland. Originally from Lublin, Poland, she was the oldest of 5 children. After surviving 4 camps, she walked back to Warsaw and then on to her village to find that she was the only survivor of her family. Lola died this year, shortly after her 100th birthday. We remember them all as dear ones, stars who lit our lives when they lived, and whose light shines so brightly in our memories, with these words from Chana Senesh. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light, long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. Yesh kochavim sheoram magia arza, רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו ואינם. יש אנשים שזיו זכרם מאיר, כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המבהיקים בחשכת הליל, הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך הדרך. הם שמרים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember, as we live our days. These are the ways we remember, we remember.
My name is Grayson Stark, and I'm the granddaughter of two Holocaust survivors. My grandfather, Robert Stark, was born in Hungary in 1932, and my grandmother, Eva Stark, in Germany in 1937. My family and I remember our pappy for his gleaming smile, his inappropriate sense of humor, and most of all, his resilience. His mischievous personality enabled him to survive the Nazis when he and his brother ran away from a temporary boys' home to find food and escape the tragic death of the many whose shoes were still left at the Danube. My grandmother Eva continues to be my family's source of strength and compassion. My grandmother's mother died only minutes after she was born into the growing violence of pre-World War II Germany. As the war picked up, our great-grandparents moved with her to Chile, where she grew up. My grandmother did not meet her father again until she was 17 years old in the United States. Growing up with my grandparents has been central to my upbringing and the creation of my Jewish identity. Sitting around the Sunday breakfast table, I found that despite the incredible challenges of their upbringing, my grandparents were able to persevere with tremendous will and determination. Despite hate that dominated their childhoods, they had nothing but love to share with everyone they encountered. They taught me the value of being compassionate and bold and continuing to honor my Jewish heritage. Eager to strengthen my Jewish identity, I have spent the past year on Young Judaic Gap Year here in Israel. Learning Hebrew, traveling the country, and meeting fellow passionate Jewish peers has been an incredible, rewarding experience. This Yom HaShoah, we will travel to Jerusalem and stand in awe before the Western Wall. At the Butterfly Statue project in Charlotte, my grandfather inscribed on the ceramic butterfly, "The best gift in life is to be free." Because of the strength of my grandparents and the Jewish people of the Holocaust, I am here today.
It's both a great personal and professional responsibility to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon. A close family friend while growing up on Long Island was Stella Marcus, or Aunt Stella, as we called her. Our families sat together in shul every Shabbat, lived down the street from each other, celebrated Seders together at our house, and 4th of July at her house. I remember Aunt Stella as a joyful presence who enlivened the room when she walked in. But she was also the first person I knew who had numbers tattooed on her arm, numbers that testified that she had lived through unspeakable horrors. Yet speak about them she did, as she chaired the annual Yom HaShoah program at our synagogue and taught at other organizations. Her daughter is Maxine, Max Marcus. Max was an honorary older sister who my brother and I loved hanging out with and visiting in her New York City apartment. But at the time, I knew little of the career she was building and the causes she was championing. I only knew that she traveled to some of the most dangerous places in the world to stand up for people who had no one to defend them. I'm honored that she is with us today to share her inspirations and to teach us about her work. Her official biography reads, Maxine Marcus is the founder and director of Partners in Justice International, providing practical support to serious crime prosecutors, victim representatives, and investigators working in post-conflict and post-dictatorship jurisdictions to help them bring justice to victims of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in their own national courts. Max is an international criminal prosecutor and investigator with 24 years field-based and courtroom-based experience in international criminal law. Her field work includes Chad for Darfur, Sierra Leone, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Hungary, Kosovo, Ingushetia, Chechnya, Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, Guinea, Kenya, South Sudan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Guatemala. She served for 9 years as a prosecuting attorney at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia on 4 cases, including the Mladic case. From 2003 to 2005, Ms. Marcus served as investigating attorney for the Civil Defense Forces prosecution team in the Special Court for Sierra Leone. In November and December 2009, Ms. Marcus served on the U.S. Commission of Inquiry for Guinea as the Gender and International Criminal Law Advisor, and from April to June 2014, she served as Senior International Criminal Law and Gender Advisor to the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office, their Prevention of Sexual Violence Initiative, and as Senior International Criminal Law Advisor to the UK Protocol on Documentation of Sexual Violence and Conflict. From December 2014 to March 2015, Ms. Marcus was Senior Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Advisor to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights Fact-Finding Mission for Sri Lanka. From July to December 2015, she served as legal investigator to the UN Secretary General's External Panel on Sexual Abuse by International Forces in the Central African Republic. Ms. Marcus is a longtime faculty member of the Institute for International Criminal Investigations. She is an honoree on the Gender Justice Legacy Wall at the International Criminal Court and the 2018 recipient of the Prominent Women in International Law Award by the American Society of International Law. Max is inspired by her heroine, her mother, Stella Marcus, who survived Auschwitz and 12 other concentration camps during her teenage years. I'm very happy to welcome Maxine Max Marcus, who is joining us from her home in The Hague.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Wolk. Can everyone hear me? Yes, okay, good. What an introduction. I'm really touched. My mother would definitely be very glad that I accepted this invitation. Not that I had really any choice, but I'm really, truly, truly glad to be here with you today. On my 14th birthday, my mother said to me, "Happy birthday, my darling. I spent my 14th birthday in Auschwitz." Whenever I tell that story, people are usually a bit shocked, if not a bit horrified, that my mother would say such a thing on such an occasion. But I know there are some of you here who knew my mother very well. And so you know that that was part of her humor, and her humor was part of why she was able to survive. My mother kept her sense of humor until the very last days of her life. So as I speak to you today, I will try to add a touch of humor, not because our topic is humorous, clearly it's not, but because it's difficult to talk about these things and it's painful, and I miss my mother very much. But I know that she would like to know that I also kept a healthy sense of humor as a way to get through the hard times. My mother was born right here in 1930 in The Hague in the Netherlands. That is where I live now with my 3 children, and that is where I'm joining you from. She had what she described as a wonderful childhood as part of a healthy, strong, and vibrant family, with many aunts and uncles living nearby on neighboring streets, sharing their lives together. Today, in front of each of the houses where my family members used to live, there is a stumbling stone in the ground as a monument and tribute to their memories. I have placed those stumbling stones here in The Hague, where my life would otherwise have been surrounded by vast amounts of extended family. Now it is just me my beautiful children, the stumbling stones, and lots of memories. My mother, Stella Splitter Marcus, was 12 years old when the Nazis picked her up and her parents and all the aunts and uncles and cousins from all the surrounding streets in The Hague. They were first gathered in the prison. This is the maximum security prison here in The Hague. And I'd like to ask you all to remember this fact for the later part of my story, that the first point of deportation for many of the Jews from The Hague was the maximum security prison. That was where my mother saw her father for the very last time. My mother and her mother, my Oma, were transported along the route that many of the Dutch Jews were taken through a number of different concentration camps, such as Vught and Westerbork, and ultimately into Poland, where my mother and my Oma ended up in Auschwitz in 1944, the year that my mother turned 14. My mother told me always that she never thought she was going to die unless they killed her. So in other words, she said, unless they had actually executed me, I knew that I was going to survive. Each survivor has a truly remarkable and unique story of tragedy and suffering, but also often riddled with small or big acts of heroism and kindness. It is those acts of heroism and kindness that are the focus of my life and which I want to focus on today as I share with you my story. My Oma had befriended one of the Jewish guards in Auschwitz. This woman was somebody who was mostly hated by the other Jewish prisoners. She herself was a Jewish prisoner who was clearly favored by the Nazis because her hair was always beautifully dyed and she had makeup and lovely clothing. So you can imagine that she was viewed by many of the other Jewish prisoners as part of the enemy. My Oma befriended this woman. The woman's name was Herta Poppert. I think Oma must have seen something in her that was a glimmer of good. Now, this woman, Herta Poppert, was the one who was tasked with preparing a list of Auschwitz prisoners who were to be transferred out of Auschwitz in order to be brought to a work camp. Now, everybody knew at that time that a ticket out of Auschwitz was a ticket to survival. Maybe not always, but it was certainly something deeply coveted. Herta Poppert put my mother and my Oma on this list to be transferred out of Auschwitz. The night before the planned transport out of Auschwitz, my mother ran a fever. She told me that she used to run fevers periodically in the evenings as a child and that it was nothing serious. She was always fine the next day. But she was sent to the sick barracks where she was received by Dr. Mengele. Dr. Mengele took one look at her, and even though she said that she ran fevers commonly and that she was fine, Dr. Mengele said, well, we need to keep you here to see if you get sick. My mother was put directly into the bed on a pile of straw that had just been used for someone who had died of typhoid. My mother spent 2 weeks in the sick barracks, and as she used to say, she didn't even get as much as a head cold. But the day after she ran that fever, her mother and the others were transferred out of Auschwitz, leaving her behind. My daughter, Ronit, is now 14 years old. And when I think about what that might have been like for my Oma to leave Auschwitz, leaving her daughter behind, even though she knew that that was the best chance of survival for both of them, I cannot possibly imagine it. And there are no words to describe what that experience must have been like. Before my Oma left on the transport out of Auschwitz, she asked Herta Poppert, this Jewish guard, to please get Stella out. And the Jewish guard promised her she would do so. As they've told the story, my Oma was transferred to a work camp where she barely ate and could barely function, just managing barely to survive. And 4 months later, Herta Poppert got my mother transferred out of Auschwitz and reunited with her mother, all still during the war. This is truly only one part of a very long story, but it is the most powerful part for me. And I believe it was one of the most powerful parts for my mother as well. After the war, as you may know, many individuals were prosecuted on allegations of collaboration with the Nazis. and Herta Poppert was among those prosecuted for collaboration. My Oma went and testified in her defense, explaining that, yes, she did have a connection with the authorities, but she was using that connection to the extent she could to save the lives and protect people. And she was acquitted. You can see how good begets good. When the war ended, my mother and Oma were liberated to Sweden, where they were in a, quote, rehabilitation camp. My mother told the story of the Swedish citizens offering them cream puffs and how sick she got from the cream puffs, and she was never in her life able to eat cream puffs after that. I know that some of you who knew her are laughing as you recall her telling this story. Here is the first and only photo of my mother after the war when she was in the rehabilitation camp. One moment, please. We did practice this, I assure you. There it is. Can you see? Okay. After the rehabilitation, my mother and Oma returned to The Hague, where my Oma reopened the fur store that my grandfather and his brothers had owned. This store is literally about a quarter of a mile that way from where I'm sitting right now, right in the main street in the center of The Hague. My Oma somehow rekindled the business, ran the business. My mother struggled to focus in school, and they stayed, waiting for my grandfather to return. One day, a man walked into the store and asked my grandmother, "Are you Mrs. Splitter?" "Yes," she said. And he said, "I was with your husband when he died." That was how they found out that he had died, that he had given up, like many people had in the spring of 1945, quite near the end of the war. But of course, they couldn't have known that then. He had watched slowly all his brothers, nephews, cousins be killed, and in the end, he just couldn't anymore. And so that was how my mother and grandmother found out about the yahrzeit date and the approximate location where he died, which was Flossenburg. My mother and grandmother really couldn't make it in The Hague anymore. There were no other survivors in the family. And in 1950, my mother and my grandmother emigrated to New York. Now, my father's family was from Berlin, and they fled Hitler in 1936. The problem was they fled to Amsterdam, like many German Jews did, which unfortunately wasn't far enough. My father went to school with Anne Frank's sister, Margot. Later, my father used to accompany my mother to her lectures in schools, but my mom never told the class that my dad knew Anne Frank until the end of her lecture, because she said otherwise they wouldn't listen to her at all and just focus on him. My father and his parents were hidden by a group of evangelical Christians in Amsterdam, and they survived in hiding. He did not leave the attic room for 2.5 years, from age 16 to age 18. Some members of this group of heroes held on to my father's belongings, and that is why I have photo albums and some other treasures. Some other members of the group brought them food, and a minister brought them into his own home to stay with him. This flat was at the top of one of those row houses so common in Amsterdam, and my father said he is 100% sure that everyone in his building and likely the neighboring buildings knew that they were there but said nothing. Do you know how many heroes that is in one go? After the war, when the minister passed away, my father's parents made this tombstone for him. You can see his name, Martin Volkema, and his birth date and death date, and you see the cross for him, and the candles, which they said was what they could do respectfully as a Jewish symbol. And it says, from your grateful friends. These names on the left are the other evangelical Christians in the group who helped. And these names on the right is my grandfather, my father's father, Max Marcus, that's who I'm named after. My grandmother, Meta Marcus Dannenberg, and Heinz is Hank, that was my father. My father and his parents also tried to make it in Amsterdam after the war, but it was too difficult. Returning to Berlin was not an option, as the entire extended family of aunts, uncles, cousins had all been killed. Other than my mother and Oma, and my father and his parents, no relatives of the Splitter or Marcus families remained in Europe. In 1950, my father and his parents emigrated to New York. That's where my parents met and married, and I was later born there. My parents raised me down the block from the Wolk family, and so Rabbi Wolk and his family, and mine, as he has said, have been lifelong family by choice. Rabbi Wolk is an absolute gem. This community is deeply fortunate to have him. When I was about 8 years old, I started asking my mother about her experiences during the war. I asked her if she would be willing to come and tell her story to the kids in my class. My mother, in fact, did, and she started talking to classes of different kids of different ages. She was somehow able to adjust the way she told her story naturally according to the ages of the children. She included enough information for everyone to understand the horrors of what she went through, but not so much that the children would have nightmares or any such strong reaction. My mother had actually gone from 1950 to 1980, basically not telling her war story at all. Nobody had asked her to tell it. And until I started asking her, she basically hadn't told it. The nights after she started talking about it, she would be sick through the night and sick the next day. But as she told her story over and over the years, she started to recover from the intensity of the trauma. Now, you can never really, of course, recover from anything like that, but she did recover from the emotional impact of it, to the point where by the time I left for college, we would have a toast and a drink after she gave a lecture, and she slept, she said, like a baby. It was through this that I learned the importance of giving testimony as part of the post-trauma recovery process. And I learned that the human spirit is resilient, and also that we can spread kindness and goodness simply through listening and sharing. Here, I'll show you a photo of my mom showing her Auschwitz tattoo to some children. Oh, sorry, it's duplicated like that. Those of you who knew her probably remember her like this. When I was 17, I went on a trip to visit the concentration camps. This trip really affected me deeply. I started teaching about the Holocaust myself. I started to give lectures, presentations. I felt I had somehow inherited a responsibility to tell the world. But over some time, the more I talked about the Shoah, the more I gave presentations on it, the more depressed I became. And I came to understand that this was because I felt a sense of powerlessness. There was nothing I could do about this horror at all. I believed there was nothing I could do. It was in the past. There was no way to help anybody or bring justice to anybody for those past atrocities. It was only through one very special professor in college who said something to me very simply. I'm sure he didn't think twice about it afterwards. But what he said was that although you can't do anything about what happened so long ago in the past, there are people suffering from persecution today in our world, and you can do something about that. From the moment he spoke those words, and I remember exactly where he and I were standing at Barnard College, my outlook on life changed, and my sense of empowerment gradually returned. I started to look for ways to actually bring some change in today's world, not by forgetting what happened in the past, but by learning those lessons to bring justice for persecution happening in the present. After college, I moved to Hungary, which was during the Bosnian War, and I spent 2.5 years there working with Bosnian refugees. One of the most amazing times in my life with my parents was when they came to visit me in this refugee camp in Hungary. They sat in a room for an entire day with one Bosnian Muslim family who spoke German. This family was trying to decide whether they should wait for the war to be over so that they could return to their home in Bosnia, or whether they should try to emigrate to Germany to start a new life there. They asked my mother for advice. My mother shared her experiences with them and told this family that she and her mother had returned back to the Netherlands after the war, not planning to emigrate anywhere, but that the home that they returned to was not the same as the home that they had left. So after 5 years of trying to rebuild their lives back home, they decided to leave their home and emigrate and create a new home in the US. That family ultimately did emigrate to Germany, and it is, of course, the case that the Bosnia they would have returned to has never been the same as the Bosnia they had left. My mother gave of her heart and shared her spirit and inspired me to keep doing the same. This focus on the good and the positive, the heroes, big and small, is the lesson that stays with me and that I want to share with you today. My mother taught me that 2 wrongs do not make a right. This is a lesson that I live by and that my children are very sick of hearing me say. It is the idea that we all have a personal responsibility, each and every one of us, to stand up to hatred, discrimination, and persecution that surrounds us. As Rabbi Wolk said, mass atrocities such as the Shoah do not happen overnight. There is a gradual buildup of hatred, scapegoating, which, if ignored by bystanders, precipitates a descent into violence and persecution. But if we stand up and if we intervene early on, then we can shift that continuum of violence into the continuum of compassion. We all have inherited the awareness of suffering and the understanding of the ultimate result of standing by while hatred takes over. We all share this common obligation to recognize discrimination and hatred and prejudice and to speak out against it while we can before we get to the point where we would have to risk our lives to protect our neighbors. That is the lesson that my mother taught me, that every single act of kindness and every single upstander's words can ultimately prevent hatred-based violence. We are not doomed to repeat the past. We are obliged to learn from the past to protect the future. Ultimately, my path led me to study law, and I became a war crimes prosecutor. I have been doing war crimes investigations and prosecutions for more than the past 20 years. Everything I learned from my mother has helped me in my work as a prosecutor. I have worked with thousands of survivors and victims of atrocities all over the world. I have seen how they can begin to heal through the retelling, and I always do my utmost to make sure that the justice system brings them what they need to the extent it can, and that the justice system properly serves the victims, as the justice is, after all, for them. Now, you remember the maximum security prison that I told you about, which was the first point of deportation of Jews from The Hague and the last place my mother saw her father. That prison is the place where we keep the war criminals here in The Hague while we're prosecuting them. My mother and I walked past that prison when I was a prosecutor at the Yugoslavia Tribunal here. Knowing then that Milosevic was imprisoned there, she stood outside the gates there and shook her fist and yelled, "Milosevic, this is justice!" The location of atrocities had now become the location of justice. As my life came full circle, so did hers. I'd like to leave you with this message. Today, as we honor the memories of our loved ones who suffered so deeply, we can also highlight the heroism of so many upstanders and the acts of kindness which sustained our community in the face of horror. The more that we stand up for each other and the more that we speak out against discrimination and hatred in our midst, the greater the wave toward compassion will be. This wave will help us and other communities to resist the trend toward hatred-based violence. So we look at the past, we memorialize the horror, and we learn from the past about what we can do today in the present to protect ourselves and our communities in the future. The continuum of compassion starts with each one of us. May all the memories of our loved ones be a blessing for all of us. Thank you so much.
Maxine, Marcus, I'm all choked up. We are so moved and so inspired by your family's story and by your career. Thank you so much for honoring us with allowing us to hear your story. We now rise to offer a memorial prayer in honor of all those who we lost in the Shoah. We are all mourners. All of us recall not one, but 6 million ones plus, not alone those we have known, but those no one can know, the names that are forever lost. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the souls of all our brethren who perished in the Shoah, men, women, and children of the house of Israel who were slaughtered, suffocated, and burned to ashes. May their memory endure and inspire deeds of charity and goodness in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace, and let us say Amen.
The Talmud tells us about Rabbi Hanina, who suffered a particularly cruel death. The Romans wrapped him in a Torah scroll and set him on fire. And Rabbi Hanina, his students, called out to him as the Torah was set on fire. Master, they asked, what do you see? And he replied, Gevilin nisrafin v'ha'otiot porchot ba'avir. The parchment is burning, but the letters, they soar in the air. Leonard Fine explained that Hanina does not say the sentences soar or the in the air or the words soar in the air. Rather, Hanina said the letters. And the Hebrew word porchot, usually translated as fly or soar, well, can also be translated to blossom. The letters of the lives we remember today, they soar and endure because we endure. The letters blossom because we commit ourselves to tend to their memories. We who live on are now responsible for using the letters of memory and comprising them and composing them into words of commitment as we live our lives. The memories of our loved ones who died in the Holocaust and the survivors who have died more recently continue to blossom in the children that carry their names. Their memories blossom in our religious school and high school students who, when they share their commitments to Jewish life, to integrity, and to service. Their memories blossom when we stand squarely in the face of darkness with the sobering persistence of ancient hatreds still painfully present, and choose to live our lives to the fullest, treating every moment as precious and every human being with respect. The legend of Rabbi Hanina is about the reality of memory. Each victim in the Shoah is a letter from the scroll of our Jewish history, soaring and blossoming and lighting the way of our collective path. And we have a sacred task and duty as well, to reach our hands out to one another, especially now, to allow our hearts to fill with compassion, especially now, to let our eyes see the humanity in each person, and to carry forth the memories of our deceased in ways that inspire us, as Maxine taught us, to be upstanders instead of bystanders. We continue with the Shoah Kaddish. Reciting it with me is Eden Gobadi, a member and leader in our community, and Eden is the granddaughter of Aviva Benari, who herself is a survivor. We continue. The words are also available on download in the chat box. Yitgadal,
Auschwitz,
Vayitkadash,
Lodz,
Shemei Rabbah,
Ponar,
Be'alma Divra Chirute,
Babi Yar,
V'amlich Malchute,
Majdanek,
B'chayechon Uvyomechon,
Birkenau,
Uvchaye Dechol Beit Yisrael,
Kovno,
Ba'agala Uvizman Kariv,
Janowska,
V'imru. Amen. Yehe Shemei Rabbah Mivarach Le'alam U'Lamei Lamaya. Yitbarach V'yishtabach,
Theresienstadt,
V'yitpa'ar V'yitramam,
Buchenwald,
V'yitnaseh V'yithadar,
Treblinka,
V'yithale V'yithalal,
Vilna,
Shemei Dekudesha Barichu,
Bergen-Belsen,
Le'ela,
Mauthausen,
Min Kol Birchata V'shirata,
Dachau,
Tushbechata V'nechemata,
Minsk,
Da'amiram Be'alma,
Warsaw,
V'imru. Amen. Yehe Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru. Amen. Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru. Amen.
My name is Alex Stiefel, and I'm a great-grandson of a Holocaust survivor, Ava Diamond, and a forced labor survivor, Leon Diamond. To end our program this afternoon, I would like to introduce two members of our community who have made it a priority to share their stories of the Holocaust survivor. It is my honor to introduce Irving Bienstock and Sully Chinkin. Irving Bienstock was born in Dortmund, Germany. His life changed when Hitler came to power, and at the age of 12, he escaped from Germany to Holland. He eventually reunited with his mother and sister, and together they traveled to New York City to reunite with his father. Sully Chinkin was born in Kovno, Lithuania, and 6 months later the Nazis invaded the country at only 10 months old. Sully and her family were prisoners in the hard labor camp known as the Kovno Ghetto. Although she was tearfully given away by her parents to try and save her, they fortunately reunited and relocated to Cuba.
Today, we remember the Shoah, perpetrated against us by the Nazis and a world that turned its back on what was happening to us. And in many cases, helping the Nazis. I remember when it all started in 1933, when I was 6.5 years old. We lived in the city of Dortmund, Germany, where I was born. Swastika flags were flying from all of our neighbors' houses, celebrating Hitler's election. Now, my name was no longer Erich Bienstock. My name became Dreckiger Jude, or Dirty Jew. I remember the numerous new laws that were passed. The Nuremberg laws. Laws that Jewish people could no longer be treated by Aryan doctors. Jews could no longer own a business or property. Jewish students could no longer attend high schools or universities. Jews could no longer visit parks and recreation areas, nor movies and theaters. I remember going to school one morning. When I came home that afternoon, my mother of blessed memory told me that my father had to flee Germany because he feared imminent arrest by the Gestapo. I remember the Gestapo coming to our house, looking for my father. I remember Friday morning, October the 28th, 1938, when the Nazis deported all of the Polish Jews living in Germany to Poland, including my grandmother and most of my other relatives. All of them perished in the Shoah. I remember Kristallnacht, the beginning of the Holocaust. I was 12 years old, and after Kristallnacht, I remember my mother sending me and my younger sister Sylvia separately to Holland, without a destination in Holland. I remember arriving in the United States on April the 17th, 1940, and being reunited with my parents and sister, and then returning to Europe as a soldier in the United States Army exactly 5 years later, at age 18. I remember while in Italy with the 10th Mountain Division, reading reports in the Stars and Stripes newspaper of the liberation of the concentration camp by my fellow soldiers in Germany. And I remember the surrender of Germany on Monday, May the 7th, 1945. I also remember the day when we were bivouacked near a highway outside of Bologna, Italy, when I saw a convoy of British military trucks passing by, flying Jewish white and blue flags with the Mogen David in the middle. It was a Jewish brigade from Palestine which had participated in the final breakthrough of the German line on April the 10th, 1945. This brigade was the first organized Jewish military combat unit since the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. Today, I remember my family who perished in the Shoah. And today, I proudly can tell you about my Charlotte family regarding our recent trip to the Jewish state of Israel. This trip was organized by my family member, Dana Capucin, and included Susan and Donald Jacobs and Lynn and Maury Sheffer. We were amazed at what we saw 75 years after the liberation of Auschwitz by Soviet forces, a beautiful, modern, democratic state. At Yad Vashem, we visited a tree and monument in honor of Gertrude Weissmuller, one of the righteous among the nations, who helped me to survive and to be here today. We were welcomed to the Knesset, the first Jewish government in 2,000 years. We were welcomed at Hadassah Hospital, where we met an American Jewish wounded soldier of the IDF. And at the Syrian border, we were welcomed by the Ayat Battalion, which honored us by standing at attention when we walked in. Today, Israel is the mightiest military power in the Middle East. Today, I speak about remembrance so that we do not forget the Holocaust still matters. We see acts of anti-Semitism and attacks against democracy right here in America. No longer are people just painting swastikas on walls. They are killing Jews in the places of worship. On January 6, 2021, as mobs stormed the Capitol, I was scared to death. If we do not remember what happened during the Holocaust, history will repeat itself. We cannot forget the necessity of speaking up when we see something wrong. Be upstanders, not bystanders. I'm Yisrael Chai.
I was born in the eye of the storm, when the world was thrown back into the dark ages, when the inhumanity of a few and the silence of too many allowed evil to win and reign. In my birthplace of Kovno, Lithuania, it took 3 years for evil to be defeated, and when it was over, 90% of the original Jewish population had been murdered, and out of the some 5,000 children under the age of 12, only 3% survived. So the question is, how come I'm here to tell the story? Because of Nania, my nanny who was forbidden to live among Jews. All she did was send word to my father that Nazis were rounding up all the young children in the Kovno ghetto under the age of 12. Because of her, a hiding bunker was dug out and I was spared. Because of Pfiffinger, my father's Nazi SS boss, the enemy with a conscience, all he did was look the other way and tacitly encourage my father to find a way for me out of the ghetto ASAP. And when my parents risked their sanity and had their 3-year-old only child tossed over the barbed wire, there was a young woman by the name of Albina. She believed she would earn fame and rewards for saving a Jewish child, and kept me safe in her Christian home for close to 3 months. And then there was unbelievable Miriam Schulman, the mastermind of the operation and the ultimate woman of valor. Raised and married in ultra-Orthodoxy, she tossed aside all she ever knew and risked her life to save the children of people she had never met. I owe my life to her courage and my sanity to her love and caring during the almost 3 years I was away from my parents. These people are the answer to the question of why and how I survived. They all had one trait in common. They took risks, some small, some very big, to stand for what they believed was the right thing to do and stand up to hate, bigotry, and murder. They were upstanders, not bystanders. Today, I remember and mourn the 1.5 million Jewish children who did not share my luck.
I'd like to thank so many of the people who participated in today's program. I'd like to thank Megan Harkavy and the Hebrew High School students, to Grayson, to Emmy Stark, joined us from Israel, to Alex Stiefel, to my colleagues, Rabbi Knight, Cantor Lissick, and Cantor Thomas. Of course, we thank Irving Beanstalk and Suli Chenkin for their tireless work of sharing their Shoah stories. I'd also like to thank the members of the committee that planned this event, representing Temple Israel, Temple Bethel, the Butterfly Project at the Levine JCC, Jewish Family Services, the Stan Greenspon Center for Peace and Social Justice at Queen's University, the Jewish Federation of Greater Charlotte, and the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. Very special thank you to Julie Rizzo, who co-chaired this event together with me. Julie represents the Butterfly Project, and she really made this event happening, knowing all of the communal players and how things get done in the Charlotte Jewish community. Julie, thank you. And also a huge thank you to Ariel DiDonato, who has been coordinating the technical side of this, who has been running Zoom all day, running back and forth. Even after a year of doing this, each new event, each new program presents new complications, and Ariel takes them on with gusto. Thank you, Ariel. I'd like to finally thank our keynote speaker, Maxine Marcus Max, who inspired us with her story, who shared memories of my Aunt Stella and Uncle Hank Stella and Hank Marcus, and delivered to us an important lesson that we take out of the experience of the Shoah. And she was very modest about her accomplishments and her work. And if you would like to learn more about her new organization that just opened, that she just founded recently, if you'd like to support her work, you can visit the website of her organization, Partners in Justice International, www.partnersinjustice.org, to learn about the work that she is doing and teaching others to protect victims of war crimes and atrocities. We conclude our service today with the singing of Hatikva and God Bless America, followed again by the slideshow of survivors who have been part of our community.
Kolot balevav hanima nefesh Yehudi homiya.
Ulefa'ate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia.
Od la'ad v'tikvatenu, hatikva v'shnot ha'payim.
Li'otam chofshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim. Li'otam chofshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim. While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us pledge allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.